Before he was the face on the dollar bill, before he crossed the Delaware, before he was the father of his country, George Washington was just an 11-year-old boy who had just lost his father and had no idea what his future held. This is the story of young Washington. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, on a small tobacco farm in Westmoreland County, Virginia, called Pope's Creek. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich planter aristocracy either. They were middle-tier Virginia gentry, always working to climb higher. When George was just 3 years old, his family moved to a farm along the Potomac River that would later be called Mount Vernon. It wouldn't become the famous estate we know today for many years. For young George, it was just home. Now, you've probably heard the famous story. Little George chops down his father's cherry tree with a hatchet, and when confronted, he can't bring himself to lie. "I cannot tell a lie," he says. "I did cut it with my hatchet." It's one of the most famous stories in American history. There's just one problem. It never happened. The tale was invented decades after Washington's death by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems, who wanted to teach children a moral lesson about honesty. It worked. The story stuck around for over 200 years. But the real story of young Washington is even more interesting because it's true. In 1743, when George was only 11 years old, his father, Augustine Washington, died suddenly. This single event reshaped George's entire future. His older half-brothers had been sent to England for a proper education. George, as one of the younger sons from his father's second marriage, didn't get that chance. Instead, he stayed in Virginia, largely educated at home and by local tutors, learning math, surveying, and the practical skills a Virginia gentleman would need. He never attended college. Some historians believe this fact quietly embarrassed Washington for his entire life and drove him to prove himself through hard work instead of pedigree. By his teens, George showed a serious talent for mathematics and land measurement. At just 17 years old, he became an official surveyor for Culpeper County, one of the youngest people ever to hold that position. This wasn't just a job. Surveying took him deep into the Virginia frontier, where he learned to handle himself in the wilderness, deal with rough terrain, and interact with both settlers and native peoples. It also let him start buying land of his own, laying the financial foundation for everything that came later. Washington's family had powerful connections, especially through his half-brother Lawrence, who had married into the influential Fairfax family. Lawrence became a mentor and role model, and the Fairfaxes helped open doors for young George in Virginia society. When Lawrence died of tuberculosis in 1752, George inherited a leasehold on Mount Vernon, the estate that would eventually become his lifelong home, and later an enduring symbol of American history. By his early 20s, George Washington was ambitious, physically imposing at over 6 feet tall, and hungry to make a name for himself. In 1753, at just 21 years old, the governor of Virginia sent him on a dangerous mission into the Ohio Valley to warn French forces to leave land claimed by the British. That mission, and the conflict it sparked, would help ignite the French and Indian War and launch George Washington from an unknown Virginia surveyor into a name the whole colonial world would soon recognize. The man who would one day lead a revolution and become the first president of the United States didn't start out destined for greatness. He started out as a boy who lost his father too soon, who never went to college, and who had to earn every opportunity through grit, ambition, and hard work. That's the real story of young Washington, and it's just the beginning.